welcome to episode 28 of React Native Radio. Today on our panel, we have Peter Pajkarczyk.
Hey, everybody.
Ali Najafizadeh.
Hello, everyone.
I'm your host, Nader Dabbit. And our special guest today is Kassandra Perch of Auth0.
Hello.
Hey, Kassandra. Thanks for joining us.
No problem.
So before we kind of get into Auth0, I'd like to know, how did you get into programming and how did you start working with Auth0?
So my road into programming was kind of roundabout. My dad got me interested in basic robotics when I was a kid. They're now called Mindstorms, but back then they were called RoboLab. And we had access to kits over the summer because my mom was a teacher. So I'd build little robots with Legos and do visual programming. And then I learned how to make my own Game Shark codes, and I made games with RPG Maker. And then I took some coding classes in high school, quit for a little while, started my major in chemistry, switched to computer science, kind of stopped doing robotics after around like the age of 12. Over the past 3 years, I've really gotten back into robotics. In fact, in about 6 weeks, I start classes for my second bachelor's degree in electrical engineering.
Very cool. So what kind of language are you going to be using to work with robotics, or what's kind of your favorite stack, I guess, and things like that?
I definitely have a soft spot in my heart for JavaScript. NodeBots is the main community that I support. And if something doesn't already work in JavaScript with hardware, I try very hard to make it work. Especially, that's part of the reason with the EE degree is with the CS knowledge and the EE knowledge, I can probably combine those to make some more interesting combinations. But yeah, JavaScript, it's my favorite language. And I've tried a bunch. I make sure not to just like kind of accidentally keep myself in an echo chamber. And I try lots of new languages, especially as a developer evangelist. And yeah.
Awesome. So we kind of brought you on to go ahead and talk about Auth0 and integrations with not only React Native, but also React in general. So can you kind of go into what Auth0 does and why people use it?
Yes. So when you think of SMS and you're a developer, you think of Twilio. We're trying to be, when you think of authentication and you would think of us, you would think of Auth0. We support many different ways of authenticating and we make it as easy as possible. For instance, once you've been implemented lock, say, and you've got a Facebook connection set up, in order to add a Twitter connection, you don't have to change the code and redeploy. You add your developer keys in our dashboard, hit apply, and then every user that logs in will now see the Twitter button. So we try to make authentication and identity as easy as possible.
Okay, so you pretty much offer an API that someone can kind of just start using without a lot of configuration?
We have APIs, but we pride ourselves on our libraries. I believe at the last count, like something like 80% of our code is open source. And it's not just an API. Like you take block, you drop it into your client side, maybe 15 lines of JavaScript, and you're up and running. Though we do have robust APIs with documentation if you want to build your own solution.
And I guess after someone authenticates with Auth0, what kind of information are you guys kind of handling for them for the most part?
So that depends. If you're using a username and password, we store that for you unless you designate your own custom database to store usernames and passwords in. If you're doing OAuth, all we store is the access token that we retrieved and the anything that you asked for in the dashboard. So for instance, whenever you log in with Facebook or Google, it says this application would like to use these features. We store a profile with access to those features for you, but we don't store the user's username and password because that would be OAuth. That would be basically like hijacking OAuth. So it really depends on the method that you're using. We also support enterprise existing technologies. So for instance, if you have a SAML server or an ADFS server sitting in the background, we can federate out that login. And that way you don't have to either maintain or continue supporting those older servers. You would just then support the Auth0 API.
I'm sorry, I don't know if I missed this, but did you mention anything about like migrating? So if I am using like an old technology, can I use Auth0 to migrate to newer technology?
Yes. So I alluded to it, but yes, I can also state this explicitly. We have a really nice feature where you don't have to bulk reset everybody's password. What we do is we connect to your existing server, and every time someone logs in, if you have this option checked, we then store their credentials on our server, and you get a nice little alert when your older database has been moved over, and you can always check on the percentage, I think, from the dashboard. If not, that should be coming soon. So yeah, you can migrate over from older technologies into Auth0.
I have a question regarding OAuth operations. So usually when you sign up with the OAuth in Google, as an example, you need to provide a callback URL, which basically points to your domain or something that you trust. Now, if I set up Google OAuth as an example and it gives me a token, do I have to basically configure a callback URL back to your server, like back to Auth0 server, or I can just basically point it to my server? How does it actually work? Can you actually describe it? Just the workflow?
Yes. So you would implement on your server JWT access, which is what Auth0 uses to authenticate. And so basically when your user authenticates with OAuth and comes back, that callback URL should be pointed at your server, and your server should say, okay, I have this JWT, I have my client secret, which is what's used to sign the key. So you can verify that JWT came from Auth0 by checking by verifying the JWT, making sure it was signed with the same secret. And so yes, it would point back to your server.
So can you kind of go into the difference between cookies versus JWTs?
Yes. So cookies, especially for single page applications, can be kind of a pain. And while they serve their purpose well and have served their purpose well, JWTs and other forms of passing authentication are becoming more and more helpful the more diverse the web gets, especially in cases like single page applications or in situations where cookies might not be available to the user. For instance, some public browsers, like in libraries, don't allow cookies because they don't want their machines getting cookies from all sorts of sites. So yes, so the basic idea is a JWT is just a string. And so you can store in local storage. You can store it as a cookie. You can also use it as not in HTTP headers. One of the most common ways is in the authorization header. You put bearer, which is to say it's a bearer token, and then a space, and then your JWT. And that serves as authentication for a lot of typical authentication setups.
Is there any browser support issues with JWT?
Not prior to IE9. Basically, JWT, the only things that are required are the ability to sign with either HSA 256 or a few other approved algorithms via the specification, and the ability to parse JSON, and the ability to base64 encode something. So if you can't do those things in your browser, then supporting it will be a little tricky. But as far as I'm aware, especially with Lock works extremely well in nearly all browsers, especially IE9 and later.
That's awesome. That's not bad at all.
Oh yeah, I'm actually doing a webinar on the 1st about what JWTs are, and the way I teach it is by walking students through writing a JWT generator, and you'd be surprised how little code it actually takes to write a JWT generator.
Oh wow, that's cool. You mean to generate tokens or to generate a certain type of function?
The tokens.
Oh, okay, cool. Nice. Do you provide any, not that it really matters because browser support is pretty good, but do you provide a fallback if you're at an older corporation who does old school authentication, is there a fallback if JWT isn't supported?
Yes. We can fall back to different types of authentication if needed. That's also where our APIs would come in. Basically, instead of using Lock, you would use either the APIs directly or a different tool to authenticate. But yes, we do support schemas other than JWT.
That's awesome.
Can you kind of go into the Auth0 store with React Native in particular and how you guys put that together for Android and iOS, and maybe any future plans that you have for any functionality that isn't there now?
Yes, we basically try to support as many languages as we can. And so if listeners have never been to our documentation, the first thing you hit when you hit our documentation is our quick starts. And so to find the React Native examples that we have, you would click hybrid mobile app and then React Native Android or iOS. The only reason there's a difference between these two is because you have to set up some keys, and the way you set up those keys is slightly different for Android and iOS. But other than that, it's the same JavaScript, which is, most of the appeal of React Native. It's the same Lock API. And so if you've ever implemented it in a web browser, if you can set up a React Native project you're ready to go. And the best part is when you go to our documentation and these examples, if you're logged in, at the top of the page, there's an orange button saying Get Seed Project. And if you click it, it'll be a fully functional React Native application for whichever platform you've downloaded it for. You have to do a couple configuration steps, which are outlined in the README, but then you've got a fully functioning application. It also walks you through step by step how to implement it in an existing React Native application. So we really pride ourselves on our documentation, and what do I try to call it? The time to first login. We try to keep that really low for users, so that it's our product's more appealing, honestly.
I haven't implemented Auth0 with React Native yet, but I can say that I did a lot of stuff with you guys in Angular, and I still have a couple of apps that use Auth0 with Angular, and the documentation is fantastic, and I've had a very good experience with it so far. So I'm really looking forward to using Auth0 with some React Native stuff coming up.
I actually learned React and Angular at the same time, and let me tell you, that causes some weird errors.
That's pretty funny.
Angular, also make sure to tell our docs team that you gave them a shout out, because they are fantastic. They are really, really good at what they do. And they make my job way easier, because anytime I need to learn a new language or framework, I just pull up the startup app that they've written, and ta-da, I'm pretty much caught up. So,
how does React Native use JWTs, or does it? How does that all work?
So Lock handles the JWT side on your React Native application. So basically, whenever you get an access token back, you actually don't usually need to check you need to check the verification, but you don't normally need the payload on the client side. The payload's normally something for the server side to check on like information, things like that. But if you do need it, Lock also contains the ability to decode. There are also JWT libraries that work with any JavaScript implementation, and so you can include those in your React Native application if you need more robust solutions. The best place to check for that would be jwt.io, which is a website dedicated to teaching people more about JWTs in general. And there is a plugin called JSRSA Sign that gives you a much more robust signing library to use with JWTs. But Lock handles most of it for you if you don't want to go too deep.
I guess Lock is a way that you can use Auth0 to authenticate across a bunch of different platforms, but you guys kind of have like used the branding Lock, I guess. Is that kind of what that is?
So Lock is the front end library. So that's kind of where we differentiate it. So Lock is essentially, that's just the front end component. In the case of Angular or React, literally the component, but in a much broader sense, like Lock is the login window component for the client side. That's why when you do any of the quick starts, you also pick a server technology, and it shows you, okay, now that you've implemented Lock on the client side, here's what you need to do on the server side to make sure that people can log in.
So I have a question regarding the React Native side of the Lock. So the Lock on React Native on both iOS and Android are written completely in JavaScript, or there is a native side that people need to basically put it into the React Native? Because what I actually see from the website, you guys already have something for iOS and then something for Android as well, which is written in native. And then are you guys actually using that one alongside with the React Native, or you actually completely rewritten the entire Lock in JavaScript for React Native?
I believe the reason we have a separate package, I need to double check this, is because some features that we wanted available needed some native code, but I believe we kept as much JavaScript as possible within the Lock library itself. So the native React Lock library is the same between Android and iOS. If I'm looking at it, yep, I'm looking at my notes, and yes, it's the same. You npm install React Native Lock, and so that's the same for both platforms. So we kept as much. In fact, I'm pretty sure it's we just got the last of the native code out of there, and that's why it's the same. The only reason we have instructions on how to do native is certain SDKs like Facebook require prior configuration in your project in order to use their access tokens. So we walk you through how to set that up so that your Facebook login will work on your React Native app.
Okay. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, we try to pride ourselves on having a consistent experience across projects. one of our like ideas or possibilities was you start a new project or you start a new rewrite. You shouldn't have to relearn Auth0 if your company switches from, Python to Ruby. You shouldn't have to relearn Auth0. You should just you already have enough on your hands learning a new language, right? So we try to keep as consistent of an experience as possible across all languages and types in order to make our users' lives a little easier.
Since you are actually working with the JWT token, I want to know your opinion about the limitations or what you really want to actually implement inside the JWT token. I just want to know because I've been using a JWT token as well in my project as well. And I just want to know your opinion about the limitation or what is missing or what's actually bothering you about JWT.
Not much bothers me. I am aware of like the limitation that, for instance, the payload is only base64 encoded. It's not encrypted in any way. If you want to encrypt it, you need to encrypt it before you base64 encode it. It does not by default have any encryption of the payload. All the key does is determine or verify the sender of the JWT. It does not encrypt the contents. JWTs by default do not do that. So the payload cannot contain any sensitive information because if that JWT gets, if someone gets a hold of it, they can easily see the payload if they base64 decode that payload. So that's one of the limitations. However, if you're aware of this limitation, which is why we try to educate all of our users with lots of free content about JWTs, you can avoid, sending sensitive data unencrypted or at all. A lot of web developers just live by the adage of not sending anything that could be sensitive to the client. However, with the advent of single page applications, that's becoming more and more of a problem we can't shrug off, if you know what I mean. Like we can't just say, oh, well, only single page apps do that, but because single page apps are becoming so prominent.
Okay. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
So can you kind of go into who the typical user of Auth0 is? Like, what's the ideal use case for someone that wants to just kind of jump in and actually implement Auth0 in one of their upcoming apps or projects? Like, what's the best use case, I guess you would say?
Right. So one of the things we also pride ourselves on is knowing where we're not needed. Whenever I do a user group, someone words that question a little differently. They always go, well, what if I just want to do one login provider? Why would I need Auth0? And the answer is always, well, you wouldn't. If you were just doing Facebook or just doing Twitter, especially for Node servers, Passport has a completely robust way of adding in one OAuth connection without any problems, or even maybe a few, but the code complexity gets much worse after one or two connections. That's where Auth0 comes in from the social side, is allowing multiple connections and not having to change the code to change connections. Also, if you have an existing enterprise server that you either need to migrate off of or need to use as a point of single sign-on, we support that. Our rules engine is one of the shining jewels, I think, of our functionality. So when a user logs on, right after they have successfully logged on, the rules engine kicks in and you write rules for the rules engine in Node. We actually have this really, really cool system in the background of Docker containers running client Node code on these sessions, and we've made it very secure. It's not like we're thoroughly penetration tested every month, so we've made sure that these are truly sandboxed. So if you're looking for those features in your logins, that's where we would come in. If you're making a one-off application and you just want Facebook sign-in and nothing else, that probably wouldn't be where Auth0 would shine. Auth0 would shine when you need Facebook and Twitter, and I've got these older employees who have SAML, who've been here for a while, and they don't want to move off their SAML SSO, so I need that too. That's where Auth0 really shines, is reducing complexity when otherwise it would skyrocket.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That's very interesting also because I've always wondered what the ideal use case, because I have used Auth0 actually for single sign-on in the past, and I've still found it to be, a really good experience, but that does make a lot of sense.
Yeah, our SSO support is something we've definitely been pushing. I just did a video on how easy it is to switch to a SAML server from a social login, and basically once you've put in the endpoints and hit go, you're off and running. There's no complicated configuration. There's no extra routes. There's just the regular Auth0 login and the same access token and the same callback.
What about just a username and password situation?
We do have that. We by default use email and password, but you can tell Log I want to use usernames instead of emails. We store those on our servers unless you configure it to use your own server. Though to be fair, your data is very, very safe with us. We just got our SOC 2 Type 2 certification a few months ago, and we are HIPAA compliant. So your data is definitely safe with us. We also do third-party auditing and penetration testing very, very often. So we absolutely value our customers' trust, and I'd leave my username and password with them, but I guess I'm a little biased.
What about like phone number authentication that you see in mobile apps sometimes? Do you know how if you sign up for Snapchat, you just put in a phone number?
Yep. We do support passwordless authentication via SMS, email, and the magic link. So if you've ever used Slack on your phone and you've logged in with your username and it says, hey, if your password is too long to type, click here and it'll send an email, and you click the link and it signs you into Slack. We offer that. We offer code by email and code by phone. So you can have passwordless implementations of Auth0. We also offer via SMS and email two-factor authentication. So for instance, if you wanted your user to input their cell phone number and then when they log in, get a text message and put that extra code in there, that's becoming very popular with websites like Google and GitHub, because we always have, a lot of us always have our phones with us, serving as an extra authenticator.
And I see you also offer the Touch ID, the fingerprint for iOS.
We do.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. How does that work?
So that works basically through implementing it in the native code. So if you were doing this from a React Native perspective, you would basically need to watch for that native event. If I remember correctly from what I've learned, you can do some watching of native events. So basically you would implement Touch ID in the native code and then say, okay, I've got this JavaScript handler sitting there ready for when this event happens.
And I believe there's also a package that you can download for Touch ID with React Native that you can kind of use for that without actually having to even go into the native code. So,
Yes.
So can you tell me a little bit about OpenID Connect?
Yeah, definitely. So it's a newer specification. It was only just finalized. And basically, it's a wrapper specification around Auth0 instead of replacing Auth0. And Auth0 was only meant to handle authorization and not really identity. It was just meant to say this user is valid or invalid. Whereas people were adding a lot of things to their OAuth implementation to kind of create identity platforms around them. And as everything with the web, we created like 50 different ways of establishing identity that didn't work between platforms. So they created the OpenID Connect standard. And it also kind of takes some of the more difficult points of OAuth away. So for one, when you want to implement a new OAuth2 specification, you have to go find all the endpoints. They might have different URLs. There's like a should URL specification, but not a must. And where now with OpenID Connect, you have to have a discovery document that when you put a GET request to that discovery document URL, you get all of the URLs you need back in JSON format. So you, instead of having to manually put in all those URLs, you just call the discovery document and use the URLs as they come in. It also does a lot more with scope and a lot more with JWTs in order to kind of create a more robust identity platform that's also standardized. So for instance, with single sign-on, if you're using OpenID Connect, all of your single sign-on applications are on the same page because they're using the same standard. So that's definitely something I think that's going to be a more common topic amongst web developers, especially as OAuth and even regular logins and interaction between applications becomes more and more seamless. I definitely think that's going to be something important to keep an eye on.
OpenID Connect, this was launched just a few months ago, right? Or maybe even a few weeks ago?
It was finalized a few months ago, but it's only just starting to gain traction among the developer community.
So say if I already had something implemented with Auth0 and I wanted to also implement OpenID Connect, would that be something that would be fairly easy to do, or is it something that needs rewriting, or how would that work?
We implement it by default. When you get your access token back, your access token, if it's a JWT, complies with OpenID Connect policy. And whenever you use any Auth0 connection that also supports OpenID Connect, like Google, it uses OpenID Connect by default. So you don't even have to make a change. And if you've been using Auth0, you're probably using OpenID Connect and you didn't even know it.
Very cool. So where can people go to learn more about this, just to educate everyone listening and myself too?
OpenIDconnect.net is a good site for learning more. And then again, I'll be hosting a webinar on June 1st. You can find more info on the Auth0 Twitter account. We just tweeted about it today. And I can share a link with y'all if y'all have show notes. That way, if you want to learn more about OpenID Connect. And then we're constantly doing new videos, new pieces of information that aren't necessarily Auth0 directly, but they're tangentially related. So even if you're not interested in Auth0 as a product, but you're interested in learning more about identity or about JWTs, definitely check us out. I'm sorry, the webinar on June 1st is about JWTs, not OpenID Connect. But we do have a recording, or we will have a recording shortly of an OpenID Connect video that'll be about an hour long. So keep an eye on Auth0's Twitter account for that. Sorry about the roundabout there.
No, absolutely. That sounds awesome. I'm going to definitely keep a lookout on Twitter. I see Auth0 does a lot of publication on Medium also, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I've seen some good stuff there.
We have a very dedicated social media schedule.
You guys are definitely consistent with that for sure.
Yeah, we believe consistency is key. If you know when and where to look for us, we're easy to find.
Hey, it's working. That's for sure.
Yeah, we're growing really, really quickly. We passed 100 employees, I think, a month ago, and we're constantly inviting new people to the team, and we're hiring all the time. So it's definitely been a whirlwind. I've only been there 6 months, coming up on 6 months, and the company's already grown so much in that time. It's been amazing to watch.
Wow, it seems like for you only being there 6 months, you're very knowledgeable about the product. I mean, you seem to know a lot about it. Did it take you a while to catch up and get up to speed with everything, or is it something you already kind of you already understood, I guess, just going into the company?
No, it was a lot of late nights of me learning about it. But my coworkers are so intelligent that it was really easy to catch up because we're all very friendly. We're mostly remote, so we communicate via Slack. But everybody at the company is very nice about answering questions. So I think it helped a lot that I was able to tap into the resource that is my coworkers and really get a top-down view of how authentication works, which is key to how Auth0 works. Because as nice as our UI is and everything, what it is, what our key is taking the complexity that is authentication in all of its different forms and trying to create a unified API for it. So when you understand the authentication that's going on underneath the understanding of the product just kind of falls in line with that.
So before we wrap it up, what kind of future plans does Auth0 have for the future, I guess?
Definitely supporting new platforms as they arise. For instance, at NGConf a few weeks ago, I think it was ActiveScript was announced. It's a new native framework for Angular. Our docs team is working on that. And so we're trying to keep on top of all of the new amazing things that are coming out of different languages and ecosystems. We are definitely trying to grow, definitely trying to get bigger as a company. And I think that's our number one priority. And then we will find things for people to do as they join. Right now, we're also focusing on our education offerings and our open source kind of I feel like culture is such an overused word, but we do truly have a very open source, I guess, team spirit would be a better way to describe it. And we're working on cleaning up all of our open source documentation and all of our open source projects to make sure everything's up to date. So yeah, kind of that spring cleaning sort of thing going on. But there's some really cool new features coming down the pipeline. I just cannot talk about them yet.
Awesome. Well, we'll have to keep an eye on everything coming out from you guys for sure.
You'll definitely hear from us about it when it's ready.
Awesome.
So, for the OpenID, because you already been authenticated, let's say by OpenID, I'm just trying to understand it, how it actually works. And let's say you already have a JWT token, which already configure with the OpenID. Now you want to basically connect to Google as an example.
Mm-hmm.
How would you actually send this token to Google? Do we have to actually send it through your server, and then your server is sending it to? Can you just tell me how it actually, like, let's say if I have because as you describe it, OpenID is more than an authorization. That's just I just want to know the very high level detail, and then because I need to put my mind into it before I actually start reading the doc. So
fair enough.
That's all. Yeah, go ahead.
So so you will need to you have your user sign in with Google after signing in with whatever system you have in place. For instance, if you want to connect accounts with a username and password to a Google account, because it's still OAuth and you would still need to authenticate with Google. However, the identity can be shared. So basically you can reconcile the identity that Google sends back with the identity you already have. So if there's missing pieces or conflicts, you can bring them up with the user. And it really works especially well in single sign-on applications, because that way when you log into a single sign-on application for the first time, instead of having to re-enter your information all over again, because OpenID Connect is there and you've got that identity, the new application you're logging into accepts that identity, and so you don't have to enter in a bunch of new information. For instance, Google, when you sign into Google Calendar, it knows everything about you in Google Mail. And it knows everything about you in Google Apps, and it knows everything about you in all of their applications. And that is really the benefit of OpenID Connect. Not just within companies though, because it's standardized and because they're looking for the same fields. It's very easy to do that outside of your application. So you can share, you can pull down from Twitter their profile, and you know what you're looking for. Well, I can't say if Twitter has OpenID Connect, but we'll stick with Google because for sure they do. When you pull down your Google profile, you know what fields to look for, and you know if something has OpenID Connect, you know it follows that standard. So it's easier to gain information about a user with OpenID Connect. The only downside to this is phishing attacks could possibly become more devastating, because if you can manage to get the callback that you're using, to be fair, that's why we whitelist callbacks for OAuth, so that way you can't get redirected with your access token to a random site. But yeah, any phishing or man-in-the-middle attacks, especially if you don't obfuscate the payload in any way, could be trickier if you're sending sensitive information, especially to the browser.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So I have another question now, following up with that a little bit, but not really. So when you authenticate with React Native, do you need to provide like a callback there?
You would probably provide a callback to your server. In our demos, that's what we handle. We do handle single page applications with lock. And so basically we don't have a quick start for that per se, but what you would probably do is combine the React Native implementation and then follow the React single page app tutorial to do the actual React implementation. That would be my advice if you wanted to do any sort of single page application, or even serverless with like web tasks or something. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I'm gonna be playing around with this week. So if I have any questions, I'll reach out to you.
Yeah, and if you find any problems or anything and you know the solution, our docs are open source, so feel free to open a pull request or an issue.
Definitely.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool. Well, I think we'll go ahead and get to the picks. Ali, do you have any picks tonight?
Yes, I do. So in our one of because we started writing the entire application in React, we realized that fetching a data, especially when you do the server-side rendering, fetching a data becomes a problematic, because you don't know when the fetch is actually done before your server is starting doing the React. So we started implementing a new project. We call it a React Transact. So this project is basically helping you making sure that the ordering of the fetch is correct, and then it makes sure that it tells you exactly when the fetch is done if you have a very complex fetching mechanism. And it's also declarative, so you don't actually need to write any code. You just basically describe it on top of your component, and then it does actually, well, so far it works perfectly fine for us, and we open source it as well. So check it out. It's at GitHub Presley/React Transact, and I'll send you that link as well.
Awesome.
Oh, this looks awesome.
Yeah.
I was just
checking
looking
that
for
out.
something like this.
Okay, cool. Peter, do you have any picks?
Yeah, so I've been working with a lot of grid data lately, and one that I just discovered, which has been like the most performant implementation I've seen, is React Virtualized. I've seen a lot of different implementations out there, but this one's been the most seamless. This offers the highest FPS. Everything about it has been great. It's definitely worth checking out for, virtually an unlimited number of rows.
That's awesome.
Okay, Kassandra, do you have any picks?
Like I mentioned earlier, the openid.net/connect website that talks about OpenID, it's definitely not just the specification. It's not like that super dry read with the musts and the shoulds. It's actually a fairly easy to read, comprehensive walkthrough of how OpenID works. And one of the things I like about this specification is there's basically 3 stages: minimum, dynamic, and complete. And so like minimal is like minimum viable to say that you support OpenID Connect, and then you can also support dynamic and complete. And it goes into detail without being an information overload. And so I'm actually, it's funny, I'm having trouble in that sense that I'm writing an hour-long lesson and I'm trying to make it even simpler than this site. And there's certain places where I'm like, nope, they just kind of made my job easier by getting it right. So, yep.
Great. Okay, I have 2 picks. The first one is React Rally. I went there last year and I'm going again this year. So I'm really looking forward to it. Had a great time there and looking forward to going back. And my second pick is actually going to be the React Native Lock GitHub page. I just checked it out and it's very cool and so many features. If you're like into React Native, which I know you are, you need to go check it out and just download the starter project and play around with it. From what I can tell so far, it's pretty awesome. So, and I've had great experience with with some Auth0 stuff in the past. So looking forward to that. Okay, Kassandra, thank you so much for taking time out of your day and joining us.
Well, thank you for having me.
And that wraps up episode 28. We'll see everyone next week.